Good afternoon, and welcome to Igniting Potential in Our Communities. And thank you for joining us. I am Medhat Madi, President and CEO of the YMCA of Greater Toronto and President of YMCA Ontario. I would like to start by acknowledging the land on which the YMCA of Greater Toronto and the Walrus operate. It has been a site of human activity for over 15,000 years and the traditional territory of many nations. These include the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, this territory is still the home of many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and I am grateful to join you from it. I acknowledge the privilege we have to create space for programs and services on this land as settler-founded charities. I share the responsibility to learn more about the Indigenous people who lived and live on these lands and the terrible consequences of colonialism. I do encourage you to reflect on your land of origin, if it's different, or the land of your ancestors' origin, its peoples, and its history with colonization. I hope you enjoyed the animated video we opened with. It is one of my favorites. It tells the story of a young girl named Farah, who does all she can to encourage and support a firefly that has lost the ability to light up like its friends. The girl represents the YMCA, and while she provides support, it's ultimately the firefly who finds the ability to shine within itself. As a charity on the front lines, we see firsthand the issues facing people in our communities. These have been amplified by the pandemic: housing, isolation, lack of affordable childcare, joblessness, just to name a few. We recognize the recovery will be tough for many people. We believe that through programs, partnerships, philanthropy, and public policy, we have the opportunity to create a more equitable recovery. We're also going through a process of confronting anti-Black racism, supporting Indigenous reconciliation, and addressing discrimination. By doing so, we at the YMCA can help create an environment that allows everyone to shine. I would like to share two short personal stories to illustrate the kind of difference a supportive environment can make.
When I first came to Canada, I was a bit nervous, but I felt so comfortable because there are people from all over the world. My name is Moses, and this is my story with the YMCA of Greater Toronto. I first joined in 2016 when my family moved from Sri Lanka because they made me. But I found out cool things were happening, like fun trips and camping experiences. And then I got involved with the YMCA's Newcomer Youth Leadership Development Program. I found skills I never knew I had, and it gave me a type of support that I didn't get anywhere else. It made me believe that the sky is the limit, and I could achieve anything I wanted to. And now, being a mentor lets me help others and learn about myself at the same time. Does anyone have any questions? Every day, my goal is to achieve something new, and there are obstacles I must overcome. But thanks to the why, I know I can.
The moment I stepped out of my comfort zone was the moment I truly started to shine. My name is Suzette, and this is my why story. In 2001, we bought a house near the YMCA in Brampton. I wanted my kids to learn how to swim, but my husband was worried about the membership costs. I heard the Y provided financial assistance, so that's how we got started. It's been 20 years, and I would never cancel it. Because it's so family-oriented, it became a second home to us. We began going so often that the staff would notice when we weren't there. I love having a place to bring my kids where I can also work out. I began taking Ariba classes, and I loved it so much that I became a volunteer instructor. I would have never done that if it wasn't for the support of the staff. I found confidence in myself that I never knew was there. My family means the world to me, and the Y is like family too.
As an Egyptian immigrant, I can relate to these stories. When I was a young man, the Y was one of the first institutions in Toronto to welcome me through the front door, not the back door. I have stayed at our charity since my start as a part-time tennis instructor 45 years ago. Now, while I'm familiar with the challenges, I am also optimistic that they can be overcome. Throughout that time and during the pandemic, I have seen the power of people coming together. Just to name a few of our collaborative efforts, hospitals ran COVID-19 vaccination clinics in our gyms. Food banks set up neighborhood locations in our spaces. The Toronto Symphony Orchestra helped boost well-being with Music on the Bright Spot, our online community for older adults. Today, I am honored to host this new virtual collaboration with the Walrus Lab, and in doing so, spark conversation on this important topic. At a time when the pandemic and systemic racism have dimmed the light of so many, our collective efforts to ignite potential in our community are more important than ever. That truly happens when every obstacle is met with support, positivity, and guidance. And that is something we will hear about today. Each panelist brings unique lived experiences and approaches to igniting the potential. And I'm excited, and we are extremely fortunate to have Ismaila Alfa, the host of CBC Radio's Metro Morning, here to introduce each panelist and moderate this exciting discussion. Ismaila, over to you.
Well, thank you, Medhat Madhi, for the introduction, and to the whole team at the YMCA of Greater Toronto for bringing us together for this event. We want you to be part of the conversation, so please join us in the chat, which you can find in the little speech bubble icon on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Now, I should introduce myself. I'm Ismaila Alfa. I host Metro Morning for CBC Radio, a wonderful position that I have where I get to speak with amazing people, very intelligent and interesting people in this city, something that I get to do right now as well. And what a coincidence that I would be the moderator for this conversation. I think about the why and my life and the role that it played in my youth and becoming part of the community. When I first moved to Winnipeg, I had only been in this country for about 2 years, and the Y was a place this was a charity that provided me with such a connection to the community. I played basketball there, I swam there, I trampoline and tumble, I met new friends there, and built a network of people who actually spent decades giving back to the community and trying to foster that amongst others. So very honored to be part of this conversation today. And of course, it is a conversation, so I'm not alone. With me today are three great panelists, all purpose-driven individuals with whom the Y has a lot in common. From the inclusivity of basketball, a sport invented at the YMCA, to leadership initiatives for newcomers, to addressing food insecurity for residents across the GTA. The work of each of these folks is deeply linked to the values and the priorities of the Y, and together are essential to igniting potential in our communities. So who do I have with me? Well, let's get into that. Mohammed Faki is, introduce himself to us today as the shawarma guy. He's an entrepreneur, a community leader, and philanthropist. In 2006, he purchased a nearly bankrupt restaurant and transformed it into what is now known as the fastest growing Middle Eastern halal restaurant chain in North America. Pretty amazing. You know the name, of course, Paramount Fine Foods. As a community leader, Mohammed regularly participates in fundraisers and community events supporting multiple causes and organizations. This role of get in where you can fit in and make a difference. So we see a lot of that from Mohammed in the community. Welcome to you, Mohammed. Also, as the Director of Advocacy and Programs at FoodShare, Katie German oversees programs happening in community and school spaces, her community organizing work centers on mobilizing people with class privilege to redistribute their wealth, organizing her neighborhood around issues of affordable housing, displacement, and gentrification, and ending the school to prison pipeline. Welcome to you, Katie, and thank you for being here. And finally, we are joined by Courtney Charles, Vice President of Basketball and Franchise Operations of Raptors 905. Courtney has a passion for inspiring and educating Toronto youth through sports, creating spaces to grow and become critical thinkers. Welcome to you, Courtney. And thanks to all of you for being part of this panel discussion today. Really appreciate it. So, this is going to be a lively and open conversation. And I kind of want to get it started with getting to know a little bit about each of you in the communities that you grew up in and how that fits into the work that you do and the conversation we're having today. So why don't we start with you, Katie? Tell me a bit about where you grew up in a place that was really important to you.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here and chat with you all today. So I was born in the States originally. So my family's all in North Dakota, come from really large farming families. My parents are each one of 11 children. So it's huge family. We moved around quite a bit in the States and then landed here in Canada when I was 6. So I've gone to school my whole life in Canada, feel Canadian, am Canadian, but have those roots in North Dakota and America as well. So grew up in a working class family. My dad did, overnight shifts work in manufacturing. My mom worked retail. And I think a place that was really important for me was our kitchen table. It was the place where everybody would gather. It would be, when I could connect with my brothers, with my parents after work, in between moments, with friends. Our table was a place that anyone who didn't have a place to go for a holiday meal was welcome at our table. And so that's always been a key part of my childhood and growing up, and something that I try to bring forward in my life today. So I think the kitchen table is the place for me.
Kitchen table is a great spot. Sort of almost the seed spot for building community, and things grow outward from there, right? Courtney, what about for you? Tell me about the community you grew up in, and what was the most important place for you as you see it through your youth?
Well, I think the first thing is I'm a proud Canadian. I'm actually born and raised here in Canada. I did do my undergrad and my master's degree in the US, but definitely something that the Y was very influential for me growing up, knowing that my world was really sports. For me, sports has kind of been the life changer for understanding how I was going to set a standard and expectation and build from being who I can or who I am into who I can be, and to be even better than that. And for me, my family has been unbelievably supportive, knowing that my mother came from Jamaica and my dad came from Antigua. So being in Canada was something completely new. But over time, it's been a place that I love. And for me, sports is not only a place that I've grown, but it's a place that I continue to go back to work with youth to help them grow not only in their sport, but to grow in education. And for me, the two go together.
And Mohammed, what about for you? Tell me about where you grew up and that very important.
A bit different place and circumstances for sure. I was born in Lebanon. I grew up during the Civil War. I've lived in bunkers during my life. I've been a refugee and I've been an immigrant. But most importantly, I grew up understanding that me and my immediate family being safe is not the only priority. I grew up wired that the only way you could be safe if we all as a community are safe, and if you help someone else, you will be blessed always, and you'll get something in return because they will help you when you need it the most. I lived in a house, we had a sadaqah box. Sadaqah means voluntarily giving. My mom used to give us $5.25. That 25 cents will go into the sadaqah box every single morning, because I was wired that unless I put that 25 cents to help someone else in need, my day will not be blessed, I will not be protected, and I will not meet great people or have a greater opportunity. So that's the way I grew up. I grew up in an environment where I've been hungry. I had nights without food. I grew up in an environment where I saw people close to me that I lost right in front of my eyes. I grew up believing that money is not important. What you take with you is not your money for sure. Is what you leave behind is your legacy. So I lived all my life wanting my parents to be proud of me, and my kids want to look up to me. And I believed always that there is nothing better than teaching our kids kindness. Don't teach them how to become rich. Don't teach them how to become the biggest doctors or engineer in the world. Teach them how to be kind.
And that box, what is that box called again?
The sadaqah box.
Sadaqah
So
box.
So me and my brother and sisters, every morning we put 25 cents. And every Friday and Sunday, we used to go to mosques and churches after we bought some foods, meals, or something that we knew the community needed at the time. And we'll go stand right there at the door of the mosque and the church, and we give it to people. My mom wanted us to actually feel it. She wanted us to feel that the importance of that trip. And I have to say something. I never appreciated that when I was a kid, but today, every time I go to Regent Park, I do it every second Sunday to cook 500 meals. I take my kids with me because when I leave there, I want to come back. It's very addictive. It's beautiful, and it touches your soul, and you feel like you're wired properly. You got wired better every time you do it, and more you do it. And that's what I've been taking my children there for 7 years now.
I find it amazing that for all three of you, your most important spot wherever you were growing up was a place that was about filling gaps in the community already, social gaps, using physical things like sport, like food, as the vessel for that. And I wonder, in the communities now that you live in at this point in time, I mean, you've all come so far from where you started. Where do you see those gaps now? Courtney?
Well, for me, the gaps are still the same. I think it's something that's never ending. I think to everybody's point, just giving back, and inviting and educating. We only know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know. So for me, my reference to the Y is it was a place that allowed you to almost dream big and almost see things in a world that you would not normally see it. And for me, we've seen sports grow among, country of Canada here at a level that is as phenomenal. I remember being a young man just thinking I wanted to get a scholarship and have my education paid for. And now we've got players that have now grown, seen our sport teams, and now play for our sport teams, which is just the inspiration of what sports has done, what educating our community has done. The growing of people is the growth of what I would like to see continue. And that's where I have most of my passion.
Katie, for you, where do you see gaps in the community now that that you want to be solved? Because you were nodding your head there when Courtney was answering. It sounds like it's the same gaps you saw as a kid that you are working at now.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the most frustrating parts about community organizing is you do see change. You see, on the interpersonal and connecting with people, and there's beautiful moments, but it's so frustrating to zoom out and see that often communities are working on the same issue for so long. And so I think part of that requires, people that are doing this work to think a little bit differently about what our strategies are and where we put pressure and how we create change. Because like for where I'm working in food, a charitable response to food will only go so far. It's fairly limited in terms of whether it can actually fundamentally fix the issue of food insecurity. So I think a gap is that we've taken these things that are fundamental human rights, like housing and food, but we treat them like commodities. And to be able to access this thing that is vital for you to survive, you need money. So as long as the system is set up in that way, we're going to have the same sort of problems. So I think those are gaps themselves in sort of treating our fundamental human rights as commodities. But I think another gap is how we respond to those. And we really need to push for more systemic solutions in addition to meeting people's immediate needs through like a charitable response. So, I mean, in food insecurity went up 30% during COVID. And when they talked to the folks, Statistics Canada did some research and said, who's actually being served by food charity, it's only 7% of the people who are food insecure. And you combine that with food banks had the highest demand ever. So this crisis is huge, but the charitable response is always going to be limited. So I think a key gap is really pushing ourselves and our communities to think strategically about how we win real change, which is getting our fundamental human rights respected at the end of the day.
You mentioned the impact that this pandemic has had on those gaps that have existed for quite some time. It's broadened some of those gaps, exposed gaps that we weren't sure how deep they were before. We've got a clearer sense of that now. And I know that the Y has actually stepped up community programming during this period, has filled in some gaps that they weren't necessarily filling before as well. I know vaccination clinic wise, there have been ways that the Y has stepped up as well. Mohammed, I wonder what changes you've seen during this pandemic and other opportunities to step up have you seen?
I think a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, as we say, right? I think what I saw, one, most importantly, the community came together. In the beginning, was very important to see that people were scared, but yet a lot of people did show up. Look, 4.4 million Canadians are below the poverty line. Breaks my heart for someone who was hungry one day in his life. That's a study that the University of Toronto and other universities have shown. I think we could resolve food insecurity, homelessness. It just needs more political will. And unless we deal with these basic human rights, it's very difficult to get to what we call inclusion. We all say diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. I always repeat that. I can say that we're in much better place 10 years ago, from 10 years ago, but today we are demanded to do better as CEOs, better as leaders. And I'm not talking political leaders. We are all leaders. Every single person who has the power of hiring is a leader. And that person needs to make a choice to reflect the streets of the city and the country in their hiring. And if they don't do that, that means that's pushing us away from our goals to make our country reflected in the decision-making table and not reflecting diversity and inclusion only at lower level, at all levels. And that's very important. The last part that I see a lot of gap in it, that a lot of people, especially immigrants, do not like to talk about that because they do not want to be looked at as a troublemakers. They do not want to rock the boat. They're appreciative of what they have in life and what Canada has given them, right? So they don't talk about hate. They don't complain about hate. They don't report hate. They don't actually believe that the Canadian justice system is available to them just because simply they're immigrant and they have a weird name or an accent like mine. And I think that's a gap that we need to educate people that the justice system is available to them and it's serious about hate. We've seen a lot of gaps. It was a very good test for us, COVID, but it's only up to us how much we learn and how much we adjust.
So we know that there are gaps. There are many of them in our communities, gaps that need to be filled. We have 3 gap fillers here. Let's talk about your actual projects and how they fit into that. Courtney, how do you see that work by Raptors 905 impact the community outside of the world of basketball, though? What do you see as far as change outside of the sport?
Well, the change is again, hiring the right people and hiring what the makeup of especially Canada is, which is diverse. And for us, it's hiring people from all different ethnic groups to also show the different ways of teaching and learning. I think that's the important part of what we've done here at Raptors 905 is we have hired women and then made sure that women are teaching the game of basketball and also are in the community and setting opportunities for females in sports. I think it's very evident that you can have the best, but you also have to have the best diverse group, which means you have a different approach to all angles of making sure that everyone is represented at some point and in some form in what it is that you're trying to do when it comes to developing and growing people.
And I guess that's a chain reaction, right? I mean, you change that, and then the next generation doesn't question why this person is involved with this organization or this sport that I'm playing, or why can't I be involved? That question over time gets eliminated. Katie, will you tell us a bit more about your project and the impact that you're seeing out there from it?
Yeah, I wanted to also mention there's a really good study that was done on diversity in nonprofit leadership recently, and they found that they surveyed the leadership within the sector, so talking about management, and it was overwhelmingly disproportionately white and women and of a certain age. And when they asked folks, what are you doing to proactively address the issue of diversity and equity within your organization, 80% of those managers said neutral, which essentially means nothing, right? It essentially means if you're neutral on an issue, you're maintaining the status quo. So I definitely hear you both on your comments around how that change has to happen, not just at the diversity within the organization. What we see is often there's diversity within the lower paid employees of an organization, the most precarious employees of an organization, and very little diversity in the leadership and the board level and the executive team. So it's something that certainly has to happen in the charitable sector, in places that are working with the Y all the time. It's a big issue for us. But to speak about some of the other work that FoodShare is doing, I mean, it's impossible to talk about, like, we have a pre-COVID and a COVID in terms of what our work looked like. So we have a initiative called the Good Food Box, where anyone in Toronto can order a Good Food Box. It's a box of fresh produce that gets delivered to your door. We use that as a social enterprise. So the money that's made from the sales of those boxes then gets applied to our food justice programming. So pre-COVID, we did like 300 boxes a week. And during COVID, we were doing like 3,000, 4,000 deliveries a week. So we hired like 65 people in a 2-week period last April. So, and part of why that exploded so much is because we started doing something called an emergency Good Food Box, which is free to the recipient. And the way that we did that was through organizing with sort of like 90 different community agencies who were able to say, we have a network of people who are food insecure, who are, they've lost work during COVID, Black families, Indigenous families, precarious workers, and we want to get the boxes out to them. So our work during COVID looks very different than what our kind of like normal everyday work looks like at FoodShare. But one thing we've done is really kept a lens of like a focus on equity and justice in terms of who we're serving and also who's in leadership, and to resource those people, make sure that they have the resources that they need. So we prioritize working with Black families, Indigenous families. We got boxes out to farm workers who were isolating during COVID, migrant agricultural workers. So trying to keep that lens even as our work shifted during COVID.
I think, and I know that the Y has been actually quite involved with food security work that's been going on during this pandemic as well, stepping in when Toronto Public Library was filling the gap and then could no longer do so. The Y played a major role in that. Mohammed, what about for you? I mean, with your organization and your projects, how have you seen the work that you have been doing impact the community? What change have you seen it bring about?
Well, I would say I have a bigger project and short-term projects. And I always say it's very important to have short-term projects so the team will feel a reason to celebrate when you accomplish those smaller jobs and things. And because it's always beautiful to celebrate with the team and find the reason to celebrate with them. And small accomplishment to get to the bigger picture. For me, the bigger picture is that we change the way we do business in Canada. Straight up, I ran a company that the profit is a destination. And it's not by cutting costs and cutting the staff and ripping off customers, it's by putting people first. And I'm not talking people as customers, I'm talking about my people, the team that I owe them my success. And second is the 3 Ps concept: people, purpose, planet, to get to profit. So right after our people, we put purpose. Right away, giving back to the community and making it change. I found that business CEO are not involved with our community suffering. They think it's not cool, it's not popular, and they do not want to speak out. They feel like they're gonna get in trouble. They might get fired. They might get a call from the shareholders. The pyramid is upside down in our corporate culture. The shareholder should not come first. Our people should come first. Our community should come first. And that's my bigger project. How I get there, I demanded from CEOs that they want to befriend me, that they want to be or think that they're aligned with me, that they actually put people first.
Now, the projects that all of you are talking about here and mentioning just seem so much like seeds that are planted and you're nurturing to grow. But I wonder what the result is. What is the resulting plant or tree? How is your work enabling, empowering individuals, supporting individuals to be in the position that you are in to give back to the community? How does that feedback loop work? Katie?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's lots of benefits to our programs that we see every day. And I think one of the questions that we've been asking to ourselves as an organization lately, and also just the charitable sector in general, is that enough? And what do we really want to win? Which for us is, food security. We want people to be housed. We want people to be fed, right? And be able to feed themselves. And how do we win it quicker? And the reality is that charities aren't really going to get us there. The thing that's going to get us there is advocacy work around policy change, and then policies put in place that guarantee people a minimum livable income, housing, food, transit, all of these things, pharmacare, medications. Like, we see people every single day that are accessing the programs that FoodShare has that are having to choose between rent and food or medication and food. And the reality is that food is often viewed as something that they can make concessions on because their other costs are fixed. You can't pay half your rent in the same way that you might be able to cut down on your food bill. And so for us, I think the real thing that's going to get us to win quicker is systemic policy change that removes this ask of like individual leaders choosing to make a choice in terms of how they lead their business or their organization. And instead requiring people to meet a minimum standard. So for us, that means that we've really stepped into doing a lot more advocacy work. Mohammed, I heard you say, like, when CEOs are nervous about, saying something or saying the wrong thing and shareholders might get lost. And I would say that that's something that's also super common in the charitable sector. There was a large chill across charities when it came to advocacy work with the previous government. And even though that's been lifted, in terms of CRA guidelines, it's still there. I think a lot of boards and leadership are nervous that if they speak up about income inequality or poverty or racism, they're going to lose funders or they're going to lose those key stakeholders. And I think something that we need is across all sectors is that bold conversation, right? That leadership.
And I know this is open conversation for everybody to jump in. And honestly, as someone who lived in Lebanon and lived in Italy, I thought we're only kind and we say sorry too much, but we speak less of what needed to be said because of a lot of red tape and because there is the biggest donor of the biggest charity that is friend of a very bad politician for that particular cause. And then the charity end up making sure that the charity will not advocate for the people why they exist to start with because of that donor, because that donor's interest is with that politician that actually not doing enough for that cause. which is we need to stop doing that. And you're right. Again, the pyramid is upside down and we need to flip it.
We're talking a lot about supports that you all are putting out into the communities with your organizations and the projects that you're working on. Now, Courtney, I wonder from you, were there systems that supported you?
Yeah, like I said, the root of my development to truly understand the challenge of wanting to be better than who I may think I am today is sports. Because it's, to me, a even playing field where the score is 0-0. You may not always have the best equipment, or you may not always have the most knowledge on it, but you can be rewarded for effort. You could be rewarded for putting in the work before it starts. These are the core things that we're all talking about. And it's interesting because within our world, we are sports and entertainment. And at some point, it's dreaming big, right? Sport and entertainment ends up being, how big do you dream? And for me, that's what athletics was able to do. It was allow me to realize that I could be anything in this world because of what sports does. You can see musicians, you can see dancers, you can see all of these different things that come within this entertainment world. And at some point, again, to Mohammed and Katie's point, in Canada, we speak much less of these things because we don't act as if it is a business or it can be profitable. In the US, it is much on a higher scale. And for me, that's when I started realizing that not only is this athletic experience helping me grow, it's making me realize that I'm also not as educated in just life itself on understanding how much more there is out there, because I need to look outside of Canada.
And that's what I want to know so much more about. Like, how did that change present itself in you in a way that impacted you so much that you want to do that for others as well?
So what I started realizing was, well, whatever Courtney I am, I'm going to be the best Courtney. And I'm going to be the best in whatever it is I do. And that's what sport taught me. Sport taught me an inner burning desire to be competitive, but not only just to win, but to bring everyone with me. I ran individual races where sometimes you may think it's only you when you run that race. But when I lost, I realized I had my parents, I had a coach, I had teammates, I had all these people that carried the same disappointment, that I can do better, but I've got to put in the work. Or there was something I could learn more, and there was something that I could add to this experience. So for me, it was about realizing that there's a effect if we all have a positive spirit, if we all take what we have and share, and if we take people along with us, then the growth becomes enormous and everyone has now a chance to win. And for me, the chance of winning is experiencing life. It's at some point, we know there's always going to be somebody else to bring along, but it's doing it in a positive way. It's making sure you educated someone to educate someone you don't know, because they need to get it as well. It's not just the people I know. It's not just the people Katie know. It's about educating as many so that they can continue to do the same, and it will all come back full circle, as stated earlier in this conversation.
You mentioned winning the race there, or running the race. You were, an NCAA athletics athlete, weren't you, running on the track? But I wonder, Katie, what happens in a community when we have a bunch of empowered Courtneys out there in this situation, feeling that way and feeling that they're going to be the best that they can be and give back? What happens in the community at that point?
Anything that is good in society comes from people talking to each other and organizing and making demands and having the belief that they can affect that change because they know that they are capable of it. And even if there are, systems in place that limit their access to power, it's, those people then going out and talking to their friends and talking to their neighbors and identifying where those struggles are, and then pushing for change and pushing for better. Like, everything we've ever won as a society that's good about, our limits on our workday hours, healthcare, like those types of social policies come from people working together to get it. And there has to be a piece in there of people saying that they know that they deserve this. And I think that also that spark of understanding your own value is key to that, because you know that you deserve it. Your family deserves it. Your neighbors deserve it. We all deserve better. And I think that's fundamental to then taking the next step, which is to say, so we're gonna make a demand. We're gonna ask for something better. So you really need that spark to keep it all going. Yeah.
I find this interesting in that, and Mohammed, I want to go to you with this question, just that you've spoken a number of times about people who run businesses and the thoughts quite often being on that bottom line. How do we turn this conversation to that bottom line and make the argument still for thinking of their work in the community for any organization or institution in a more holistic way?
It's easy. You look 10 years ago, and we were not speaking that much about corporate social responsibilities. Today we are. I think CEOs who are deaf or acting deaf, or shareholders that they think their lip service is working, they're much behind. And they will see it in their bottom line very soon. I'll tell you how we do it. We put our hand together, all of us, and we hold each other's hand, not to support community that do not have initiative to support the planet, not to support community that do not have initiative where they put their staff first, not to support companies that don't have initiative that helps the poor, help the homeless, stand for what's right, and speak out against anything that is unfair or injustice or inequality. If we all hold our hand as a community, not to support those company profit and bottom line will be impacted. I'm not saying it will happen in one day, but it's happening already. Shareholders are asking their CEOs to be beyond just good corporate CEOs. They want them to do more for the community.
I was about to say I get a sense, but it's pretty easy to tell that none of you three want this work to last one generation. You want this work to grow generation to generation. So what's important to make sure that that these plants grow back every year, stronger, bigger, better? Courtney?
Well, for me, it's always to make sure people are smarter than I am. Got to continue educating, got to continue sharing, got to continue giving. You got to be selfless. You got to find a way to give all of what it is you have. It starts with your family. I think, as Katie said, you got to come to the table, and you've got to make sure that everyone has been given the opportunity to grow and to build. And then, to Mohammed's bigger point, from a corporation standpoint, we got to build some accountability. We got to figure out how we're going to lead by example, but then also build the bridge between the gaps of what we are seeing, and how we keep the conversations going. How do we make them comfortable? I think sometimes it's an uncomfortable conversation that people are steering from, but if we are consistently communicating and we are finding ways to be better in uncomfortable situations, then we are now in a place that we're moving forward. So for me, it's having these discussions, but also that the work is consistent. I think we need to always remember that we are nurturing and building youth, and that will always be an opportunity to continue to grow. And how do we make that more efficient? How do we give more access? And to me, that's what sports is. We can win a championship, but how do you set yourself to continue to win more? And how do you do it with others? You may do it with a different coach. You may do it with different teammates. You may do it when you're young. You may do it when you're older. And for me, this is the cycle of life, which you are just continuing, trying to grow and to get better each day.
I mean, it's interesting work. It sounds like in all facets for all three of you. I guess with Raptors 905, it's getting the team to represent and then believe in the community. In turn, the community believes and supports 100% the team, and that just goes over and over and compounds itself. Katie, how is Food Shares community investments recirculating and growing?
In many ways. I think, I mean, one of the quotes that like sits by my desk, and I've moved it from desk to desk, is if you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you're here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. And it's from Lila Watson, who's an Indigenous artist and activist in Australia. And I think that has really come to center FoodShare's work, that we're not operating from a charitable model of like, there's people with money and there's people in need, and we're going to be the intermediary. And then people are, at the end of the day, we're going to count how many people were served, and then we're going to send that back to the people with money. We want to ask these bigger questions about liberation and justice as they relate to a fundamental human right around food. So it means that a lot of our programs are focused on trying to connect with the people who are already leading this work, who have been doing food justice work in their neighborhood for decades, but don't have access to funding. Where are those people? And how can we use our resources, our space, our connections to funders to lift up and amplify and resource that work? And to understand that, you know, a lot of the issues that we've been talking about today, and just like that COVID has exacerbated, but have existed forever, like patriarchy, racism, colonialism, all of these sorts of like multiple forms of violence, they're single issues, but they're all one issue and they're all interconnected. And so I think for us at FoodShare, that means we're not just talking about how do we get people without food access to food, which is very much a charitable model, but how do we actually look at how the whole system is functioning, and how do we shift the balance of power so that people who are systemically marginalized get the power and the resources that they need to fundamentally change how the food system works, so that they can feed themselves with dignity and joy, and not rely on this sort of like charitable corporate leftovers from rich people model of you get what you get and that's it. So there's lots of ways that our programs kind of build on that, but as an organization, we're really trying to shift the conversation to understand that these problems need to be thought about in that bigger political sense, rather than just a small issue that can be not small, but you know, a standalone issue that can be addressed by charity and by giving, because they can't. Charities cannot fix food insecurity. They will not, they cannot. If they tell you that they are, they're lying. They're doing their best, but they will not fix the problem. And so we're trying to really center it in that larger political conversation about how all of these issues, these social justice issues, are deeply interconnected and tied up together. And we need people that want to do the work, and the work means working on all of those things together at once.
Mohammed, what vision of the future do you have for communities and the individuals in those communities, if we can implement the kind of change that you're advocating for in a long-term and sustainable way?
I find it it's a bit different the way I see it. I see it not difficult. I see we need to implement something new program called Kinder Canada. And I think that Kinder Canada program should change the way we celebrate people. Because if we start celebrating people for the right reason, our kids and the next generation will start wanting to be celebrated by going and doing certain kind of thing. And I think we become what we celebrate in life. And making a change, usually 90% of the time, it comes with pain, but it's okay. So if we were to say, it doesn't matter how many million your company made, but you will not be awarded that award unless you have done enough for the charity. It doesn't matter how many medal gold you won, but you will not be celebrated unless you're a kind person to your team, the staff, and to the community. We will have people that become kinder, and Canada will lead the world in kindness. And there's nothing better for Canada to have as a title worldwide. I think we do become what we celebrate. And if we stop celebrating the people for their money only and their success only, we'll have a better place, and we'll have this kind of capitalism and kind of Canada in general moved from a generation to generation, and people competing on success and being recognized, while kindness and being good to your neighbor is only part of it, and without it, you will not be celebrated. And I think that's the solution, how we move it forward.
I find that quite interesting. I was actually just a few months ago speaking with Dr. Duke Redbird, Indigenous elder, who was saying to me, why do we question why we have the issues that we have in this world today, when we are raising our youth to win by any means necessary, and to game the system in order to get the most for themselves. So I take your point, Mohammed. Courtney, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, what do you see? What type of future do you see for communities if we can implement this kind of change that we've been talking about today.
No, I agree 100%. I think that's where sports comes in. We sometimes get clouded and just individually trying to be the best. And that's why I use the example of being a runner, because I used to think I was alone. When you pass someone and when you get past, you think it's just the one or two individuals that are in that race, but the impact is multiple for everyone involved. First of all, it's entertainment for everyone to see people trying their best at something that is not given to them. Because even when you think you are individually the best, to Mohammed's point, you can make $1 million, you're not doing community work. Well, when you start a race or when you start a sport, you're not awarded being the winner. You still need to go out and you still need to put in the work and you still need to get to the end of the event. And at some point, that's the standard that needs to be set for what it is that we're doing in our communities. We need to start setting a standard that allows people to realize that this is where we are today and this is where we need to get to when it comes to helping our community, helping people grow, giving back, raising our youth. So for me, it's continuously making sure that we do start to build a standard, not only corporately, but as a country on who we are as people.
Katie, we'll give the last word to you on this. I mean, from the spark at the kitchen table as a kid to the project you work well on now, if it can continue in the way that you see it and the way you've been advocating for, what is your vision for the future of communities and the people in them?
Yeah, what is the vision? So I think one thing I'll say is, as someone who came to Canada and is, formerly Canadian via the government's perspective, I view as a fundamental responsibility that I have is to hold the government accountable. And that includes acknowledging where our systems are failing and where the government itself and the nation state of Canada and the project of Canada, which is a colonial project, is fundamentally violent and has failed. So I think that is part of what being a Canadian has to require, and as part of that understanding of these issues being tied up together, right? And that, I think, speaks to my vision, like the vision that I have for my community and the community where I sort of like organize and live is that everyone is able to get what they need to not just survive, but to thrive. And they get that through collective care and taking care of each other, and looking out for each other and supporting each other. And if that means engaging the state or the government to have better policies and better programs and better regulations, let's do it. But if it also means that they're not going to give us that because we might not get it in a generation, what can we do as a community, as a neighborhood, to look out for each other, to better support each other? And I think a key part of it has to be that, like, when people have dreams about what we could have and what we could be, that we don't shoot those down. I remember talking to my parents about, like, I essentially described like affordable housing as like a 6-year-old, and my parents were like, well, that'll never work because X, Y, Z. And I was like, no, that's a great idea. But I think like young people and all people are often coming up with, what our communities could be and could look like. And we don't even get to try because we're just so used to saying, well, we've tried it before and this is why it's never going to work. And so much of organizing and creating community has to involve this idea of like, what do we want it to be and what are we working towards? In Toronto, there was a coalition of organizations that grassroots groups that got together to talk about the issue of policing in schools. And at one of our first meetings, we said, what if we just got police out of schools? And some people were like, that'll never happen. We'll never get that far. Here are the other steps we're going to have to take. And within a year, we got the police program removed from the Toronto District School Board. And that was like a very fast timeline. And it was a multi-generational coalition of folks from across different communities that were organizing around that issue. And I think it could have been very easy in those first couple meetings to say, that's never going to happen. We don't have the power. They're this large institution. We're talking about the school board. We're talking about the police services board. How are we going to go up against that? And we did it. We did it pretty quickly. And so I think that idea of like allowing people and the space to dream and to think about what they want their food system to look like, or the housing or the transit to look like, but then to also be organized enough to mobilize people to resource that vision. So then what do we need of our government? What do we need of, the different sort of federal, provincial, municipal, whatever? How are we going to actually make that happen? And not just to say, because we often do like, oh, that'll never work, and we got to work within the confines of what we can do.
I something you said there just hit a nail right on the head for me, because I've been just trying to think about even my youth and the why and the role that it played, and what it did was inside of that building with all of those people, I learned that not only can I get there, but I can give, and that empowered me and gave me confidence to go out there and actually make change in the community, along with all those other youth I was in programs with as well. This has been a complete pleasure for me to speak with all three of you. Thanks so much for being here. A huge thank you to Katie, Mohammed, and Courtney for joining us today. And thanks to all of you for being here with us as well. I encourage you to check out the work of each of these amazing folks that I've been engaged in conversation with, as well as the many offerings of the YMCA of Greater Toronto. You can learn more at shineon.ymcagta.org. Thank you.
On behalf of the YMCA of Greater Toronto and the Walrus, I want to sincerely thank our moderator and participants for bringing their unique perspectives to such a thoughtful discussion. It truly shone a light on the diverse approaches that can help everyone reach their potential. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and that you took home a nugget of inspiration that will help you spark potential in your community. Thank you for joining us, and do have a wonderful day.